There has been a lot of discussion and debate around what makes innovation effective inside and outside the GCoE ecosystem. So in the next 40 minutes, we will first explain to you why GCoEs in India need to make innovation a strong suit for themselves. And then we will present to you our view on what makes GCoEs truly innovative and where the India ecosystem lies today. So let us start with why we believe innovation is an imperative for India GCoEs. For a long time, India has been one of the most favorable destinations for companies to set up their centers. If you look at the global ER&D outsourcing market, 30% of the market is owned by India. And the numbers really continue to grow, and there are a lot of centers, there are a lot of companies still setting up centers in India. So even during the peak of the pandemic, we had 140 companies come in and set up offices here. But since since the longest time, the main driver for companies to really come here has been the cost arbitrage. So if we look at the graph here, you'll notice that the cost of setting up a team in India could be 1/3 of that of setting up a team in the US. But this cannot be an advantage that we have for a long time, simply because there's a lot of cost pressure that is building up on us, and the talent that really exists in the ecosystem today wants to do work that gives them more ownership, that and for that we're facing a lot of attrition issues. We're seeing employees leave, join peer companies or join startups, and that ecosystem is increasing at a rapid pace. So unfortunately, if we like it or not, we need to continue to make India interesting. And the way we can do that is through making innovation an imperative for GCoEs. So we have the high quality technology talent in the ecosystem. The technology startups are leveraging this for interesting work. We can do the same. We can have talent run innovation from within our companies. We have a very mature startup ecosystem. We have 30,000 startups. We're seeing companies collaborating with these startups. There is a lot of commitment now to industry and academic collaborations. And of course, like we all know, India is also a great market. So we have all the ingredients that we really need to make it interesting for the HQs, to make it interesting to deliver on the different growth mandates that all of our businesses have. So keeping these ingredients aside, we thought it would be important to understand that if we are to develop that ecosystem and deliver on these mandates, it'd be good to reflect on how ready we really are. And for that, we created a 4-stage innovation maturity framework that you can see on your slide, on the slide here. So on the x-axis, we have the innovation maturity. And on the y-axis, we plot the age of a GCoE in India. The line that you see here is the value generated. So as a GCoE matures from one stage to another, the value generated through innovation goes up. So the first stage in the maturity framework is innovation as a concept. So this is where the GCoE wants to pursue innovation, but the efforts may be slightly ad hoc. Now, what happens is when the GCoE is able to get enough mind share and enough resources, they start being able to commit to a few innovation programs. That's when they reach the innovation as an activity stage. At the activity stage, we see multiple programs running. So these could be startup programs, it could be internal innovation programs, it could be a mix of different levers. But there's not a very clear view on the kind of pipeline that the GCO is able to build for innovation. But once they crack that and we start to see a very, very clear pipeline emerging, we see that GCO is mature to the next stage, which is innovation as a process. Now, the focus at this stage is really to keep working and building that pipeline continuously, ensuring the conversions improve, you're able to deliver business impact continuously and at a good pace. Once this happens, the value that GCoEs are able to deliver starts increasing, and the business partnership or the interest that comes in from various leaders starts going up. So that's where the mandates also start becoming much larger. And that's what we call as the stage of innovation as a culture. So at the culture stage, you'll see that the GCoE has a good portfolio of innovation projects. They're taking bets. Teams or employees from within are actually picking innovation as a career path and able to grow, help the company grow in new areas of business. So to be able to map the India ecosystem across these 4 stages of maturity, we looked at 4 key pillars. The first pillar is the strategic intent. So here we look at the local innovation charters, the opportunity areas or the themes that you're actually looking at that you're pursuing in the local innovation charter and how they align to the global business priorities. And not just in terms of alignment, but we're also looking for the kind of commitment and resources that GCoE is able to get on these areas. And from what level of the organization is this commitment really coming in? Next, we look at process. So process is to ensure that whatever strategic intent or commitment that you have, do you have the capabilities in place to deliver on that? And we need to ensure that the processes are not any processes, but really the right processes that effectively help you deliver outcomes. The next pillar that we look at are enablers. So processes are not enough alone. You need synergies, and enablers is all about synergies. So if we're looking at the HR teams, or we're looking at the finance or legal teams, how do you really work together with them to create the right sort of value proposition? How do you create the tools and curriculums? How do you create certain policies and functional practices that actually allow for your organization to pursue innovation? And finally, we have the innovation metrics. Now, the innovation metrics are in sync with the strategic intent, process, and enablers, and they ensure that you are going ahead on the right track and you're continuously making progress. So based on these 4 stages and the 4 pillars that we just discussed for the last 2 slides, we spoke to 45 organizations. We looked at their data and we analyzed it based on our framework to see where is it that most GCoEs lie. So what our framework indicated is that the India ecosystem has significant ground to cover to realize the innovation imperative that we were discussing. Most of the GCoEs really lie, so 62% of the GCoEs really lie in the innovation as an activity cluster, followed by innovation as a concept cluster, which is at 22%. But let's dig a little deeper and understand why is some of this happening. So the next thing that we want to talk about is the innovation mandates. So first and foremost, even when a GCoE is able to get buy-in from a senior leadership, that is executive level sponsors, there is a focus on driving only incremental and a little bit of transformative innovation as well. So we see that out of the 62%, another 22%, a good 46 and 40% actually have CIO or CTO level sponsors for innovation programs. But when we look at the mandates and what are they actually pursuing, it's mostly around incremental improvements that can be pushed onto product roadmaps. So the question that comes in is, why is some of this new growth mandate not coming to the India GCoEs? And why is it only that these 16% of GCoEs that we're seeing on the other two stages, that is process and culture, have been able to create room to really participate in the organization's new growth agenda? Then the other thing that we also need to keep in mind is the levers and how our organizations, how a GCoE is going about their innovation mandate. So if we look at these levers, we'll notice that internal innovation or employee-led innovation is a favorable is a favorable lever across GCoEs, across any stage of maturity. So at least a basic internal innovation program exists. And a fair number of GCoEs are also participating in academic collaboration and startup engagements. But the interesting thing that we notice here is that while GCoEs work with startups, they are not necessarily very structured programs. So out of the 75% GCoEs across the 4 stages that are working on startup programs, only 14% have actually structured programs that lead to long-term partnerships. If we look at the rest of the startup engagements, it could be restricted to sourcing, then handing over to, say, the HQ or another part of the organization, or doing it on a very, ad hoc or need basis. There is not a strong role that the GCoE in India is actually playing in terms of the startup lever. Now we try to understand that, okay, all of this is happening. These are the trends that we're looking at, but why is it that we see some of this happening? And then we were able to summarize 4 key challenges that GCoEs are facing to take up more innovation work. So the first one is really the execution focused intent. We see that GCoEs are trapped in like an execution dogma, and many employees are not really able to see the big picture. There are very genuine barriers to understanding the organization's strategy, or being able to communicate and work on it directly. And finally, there are very few entrepreneurial leaders who are actually able to bring the GCoE outside of the status quo or of how they've been operating for a long time. The next fundamental challenge that we looked at is that the different programs are actually designed in silos. So it could be one leader coming in at one point in time saying that, hey, we can design this particular, say, hackathon, we can put an innovation lab in place, or we start a startup program. But it's not very in sync with each other to make sure that these programs are actually coherent and able to give a larger outcome together. The other challenge that we see is that there's very limited room for employees within a GCoE to be able to pursue innovation as a real career path. And that's mainly because a lot of organizations are actually struggling with when is it that we should say yes, or when is it that we should allow a team to work full-time on a project. And finally, something that we're seeing across GCoEs is errors or in the kind of metrics that are being picked. So some of the most common thing that we're looking at is that there's a lack of leading indicators. So when we're looking at business impact, it tends to be a lagging indicator saying that, hey, I want to have that much impact on revenue, or that much impact on cost, but that is something that takes time. So what are some of the leading indicators that you need to have in place that helps you progress from one to the other, so that you can eventually reach that kind of business impact that you want to create and do it in a consistent manner? So to now go a little more deeper and explain to you where is it that we came up with these four, say, broad observations from, we're going to get into the next section, and that's where we're going to look at some insights and case studies and evidence from the ecosystem. We'll go by each pillar of maturity that we've discussed. So the strategic intent, process, enablers, and metrics. And each pillar at a time, we'll look at the four stages and what's really happening. So the first pillar, as we discussed, is the strategic intent. It's about the innovation charter. If the centers, themes, or opportunities that they're really pursuing is solving for short-term business priorities or long-term business priorities and growth. The scale of innovation that's really happening from the center, is it mainly incremental innovation, or is there breakthrough innovation also part of the charter? And if to pursue this, there is enough resources and commitment from the right levels in the organization that's actually in place. So what we found was pretty interesting. To share our findings, we're highlighting two main stages, which is where most GCoEs are, that is innovation as an activity, and then the strategic intent that takes you one level up, which is innovation as a process. So when we look at innovation as an activity stage, we say that despite the BU and executive level sponsorship, most of the mandates are around thought leadership, patents, or incremental improvements that focus on customer experience or product roadmap. The other thing that we notice is that, yes, everyone realizes that there is an importance to bring business units into the conversation. And we see very innovative formats really come up. So we see innovation councils, we see innovation champions, all of these, different formats that organizations are trying to make collaboration with the BU or HQ leaders really happen. But what we notice is at the essence, all of this is still very people dependent, because there's no real accountability. So it's not that a particular BU or HQ is holding you accountable to have a particular amount of impact or get that kind of a business result. And hence, it's really, whatever people in that particular situation decide to do and how they decide to structure the partnerships. At the innovation as a process level, you can actually observe the difference. So there are executive level sponsors. Mandates include new growth or breakthrough, which is getting into new markets or new product innovation. The collaboration mechanisms have a lot of accountability around it. And there are specific budgets. Also, we see that, pilots and POCs can actually be signed off locally. And when there's a result on that, it can start being handed over to the business. Just to share a little more evidence of what we were seeing, let's look at the two charters that we have on the left side of the screen, which is a GCoE at a concept stage and activity stage. So you see words like drive a culture of innovation, dedicate time to promote innovation. So you see that they're trying to solve for a lot of mind share at this point. The other example, which is innovation as an activity stage, we see a lot of focus again on culture. So creating that mind space or mind share. We see incremental innovation. We see technology areas being called out. So technology areas are good and they're important. It's very important to tie that into a business problem, either for the short term or long term, very clearly articulated that you're trying to solve for. Now, when we look at the GCoEs on the right-hand side, which is process and culture, you notice that there is a clear, ambitious target that they have in their strategic intent. So there is, for example, a charter for building data products from the India Center to create a $XX, which they have the amount for, digital business from India. And then it's also articulated as to how is it that they want to create these products and for whom. The next one, which is innovation at a culture stage, we see that the center has actually taken the responsibility to drive innovation within emerging markets, so kind of help their organization land into into a new market. And there are a lot of accountability mechanisms around this as well. Now quickly move into the next pillar, which is innovation as a process. So at process, we are looking at the team. So what is it that the innovation PMO locally is focusing on? What are the kinds of innovation programs that are being leveraged? Are they different levers? Are they, heavy on one lever? What is the kind of, innovation that you are able to nurture? So you can't just have breakthrough innovation in your mandate. There have to be programs supporting it, which actually help you nurture breakthrough innovation. And lastly, of course, customer perspective. So we're looking at not just access to customer perspective, but also how is all of this access, be it data, be it conversations, how is it being really leveraged across the innovation journey? So what we found was that for the majority of the GCoEs, now they come into two pillars, which is innovation as an activity and concept. There is no clear innovation pipeline yet. And at the concept stage is still running ideation workshops or some kind of ideation events to make to ensure that employees are able to engage. And at the activity stage, they're aiming for having POCs or being able to deliver on a particular program. So deliver my startup program or deliver my particular a set of innovation hackathons. But across the multiple levers, there's no coherent view of the pipeline that's actually being created through these programs. And what happens at the process stage is that at least one lever, be it startup, be it internal, be it anything, at least one lever is consistently contributing to innovation pipeline, and the team's KRAs are also very linked to it. So because the team's KRAs are linked to conversion and pipeline is why the programs start to become a lot more coherent. And customer data, so we see that customer data, there's a lot of investment happening across GCoEs who are specifically at the activity stage. So we see them investing in prototyping labs or customer experience centers and all of that. Whereas at innovation as a process stage, we see them having frameworks to actually utilize that customer insight into their innovation process. For example, it could be used to make a business case. So yeah, now we'll quickly go on to looking at a case where a GCoE really evolved through these different stages of maturity and is now at innovation as a culture stage. So almost a decade back, the GCoE's headquarters announced the digital transformation agenda. And at that point, the local entity was primarily focusing on incremental innovation. The India GCoE, it kind of continued on the same path for about 3 to 4 years until in 2015, they actually took up the mandate to focus on digital transformation locally as well. They came up with a bunch of emerging technology COEs internally. They changed their entire hiring strategy through hackathons to recruit a certain kind of technology talent. They then started collecting a lot of problem statements from different business units across the globe, and they started to also collaborate with academic institutions and run POCs with startups to see how some of these problem statements can be solved. slowly what this evolved to is they even internally started being able to create actual startups within the company that were able to that they were able to spin off either into a different BU, or some of it was really taken up by the existing BUs. So what we see is that over time, this center has been able to create a bunch of very coherent innovation capabilities that deliver a common goal. So they are today leading the digital transformation agenda for their organization. They have a portfolio of incremental, transformative, and breakthrough innovation that's really coming out of this center. So something for all of us to think about is that how is it that we can move to not just programs, but a bunch of coherent programs in our GCoE, and how is it that we can have this journey done much faster. The next pillar that we are going to speak about is the enablers pillar. So like I said earlier, this is really about everything that supports the innovation program. So the different functional synergies that are critical success factors to the success of the program. So it could include the value proposition. What is it that we're offering our employees? What is it that we're offering our startups to be able to innovate? What are the kind of tools and curriculums that are actually in place, and what are the policies that we have in place? So to look at the observations, we look at innovation as an activity, and then we'll see a drastic change as to what is happening in innovation as a culture. So we see that in the activity stage, the focus of the HR and finance synergies are limited to solving for participation. So you will see words like making room for participation, or they're looking at something which is more immediate gratification. So having award programs. Even in the learning is focused on exposure. So they're trying to solve for exposure to innovation skill sets like design thinking or using business model canvases, and not necessarily that the L&D programs are in sync with the various various innovation programs at the activity level. What happens at the culture level is, at the culture stage, is that there are formalized mechanisms and practices that have been put together with HR and finance to commit resources, not only in terms of participation, but if someone wants to pursue a project full time, then that's been navigated as well. Yeah. Then we see that the L&D focus is is around growth. So it's not just design thinking and some of these skill sets, but it's also how is it that you can create your next new business for the organization. The KRAs evolve, so it's not just about recognizing employees anymore. It is about holding them accountable, and there are structured incentives around this. And the learnings, another interesting part of the learnings is that there is a lot of sharing, just like it happens in the startup ecosystem, right? There's a lot of peer learning of failed startups. What is it that we can learn from our journeys? So we see that kind of thing happening with innovation as a culture entities as well. Just again to provide a little more evidence from the different organizations that we've been interacting with, you'll see the concept and the activity cluster. So you see keywords like R&R for IP filing or awards, or recognition and showcasing. Whereas on the process and culture stage, you'll see that change. You'll see a lot more accountability coming in, accountability for running a pilot within a particular business here, or a particular target given to employees. This particular first case is targets around incremental innovation. It is not around larger innovation, but it is pretty interesting. Then in terms of the culture stage, of course, accountability exists, but there's also a lot of freedom and flexibility given, saying that, okay, if you can prove that you can do this, then you have the freedom to pursue this full time. Moving on to the next lever, the lever that really, helps us stay on track and make sure we are effective across programs. So this is really about measuring how, this is really about measuring the progress at a site level. So are we improving from one year to the other? And the next bucket is really the different programs that we are running. If we're running startup programs and hackathons, how is it that we should be measuring the success of any of this? What are some of the key things that we want to track? So what we see is very interesting. The trend actually is that even if metrics are slightly similar, so you can't say that someone at an activity stage is not looking at business impact. They are looking at business impact, but the prioritization of these metrics really change from one stage to another. So you see that at the innovation as an activity stage, the focus is to measure input and output of the program. So they'll be looking at participation, a number of ideas, selected for the next level. Whereas in innovation as a process stage, it slightly changes. You're still looking at number of ideas, but now you're also looking at the dollars that you've gotten signed off, or the amount of money that you've been able to save. The pipeline metrics become extremely important. So you're looking at how effective your pipeline is in terms of how quickly does it convert, what is the volume of ideas that you're sitting on, what is the impact that these ideas are created, because you could have an idea that creates a smaller dollar impact than something that can be much larger. So that all comes into perspective at the innovation as a process stage. Finally, at innovation as a culture stage, now they are pretty confident about the kind of pipeline that they have, and this has been consistent. So what is the next level for these entities is basically taking on targets like year-on-year increase in the amount of new products that they're putting out, or the percentage revenue that they're able to contribute through new product innovation. And as a whole, they are looking at the return on the entire innovation portfolio from the center. To again provide some evidence and look at a few case studies, if we look at the innovation as a concept stage, we see that there's a lot of focus on submissions or employees engaged. Now this starts changing at the activity level. The pipeline view starts to come in. That's why we see a few things. If you look at example D, you'll see that there is new ideas or POCs are evaluated at on a scale of 1 to 5. So they're starting to look at how good the pipeline is, and there are different metrics like impact, novelty, and all of that come into play. What happens at innovation as a process is that there's very clear articulation of the impact that you want to achieve. So I'm not only looking at impact like we see in company D, but I'm looking at a very specific amount of impact. So this particular GCoE has defined what is the minimum acceptable, say, return that they need from a large enough project. And hence, if they are to take that approval rate up, then they need to get confirmation or evidence of specific metrics like the business relevance, the potential impact, been proven, and the confirmation of right to win and team's ability to deliver. So a very strong project evaluation framework. Finally, like we discussed at the culture stage, it is really to go to the next level, and it is all about output and business impact. So what they're tracking themselves for is percentage revenue and percentage impact on savings in some of these examples. So finally, to summarize, I'd like to say that, innovation is very, very context heavy, and everything that we discussed or the examples that we were sharing so far are just observations and insights that we've had. They are not necessarily best practice recommendations. So something that might apply for an organization at innovation as a culture or process stage might not apply for the center for a center at an earlier stage of maturity. So that's something that we have to be conscious about. But something that we know works with innovation always is the first principles. So here are a set of first principles that, irrespective of where you are in the journey, you can focus on. So emphasize value creation, always tie it to business impact and keep moving forward with that. You want to ensure you have strong support from leadership, at least one leader. You want to take an ecosystem approach. By this we mean ecosystem as in within your GCoE as well as the India ecosystem. So internal, external, everything. Keep an eye on output and speed. So that's how you keep improving and going from, say, one stage of maturity to the other. And enable employees, give them freedom, hold them accountable, and that's how you can solve for risk. So now that we have discussed these first principles and we have a robust framework where we gave you a flavor of in the beginning, and we gave you a bunch of stories from the ecosystem, we want to tell you that we are very, very committed to being simple with innovation. So we wanted to convert our entire framework into a set of into a simple checklist, right? What can get simpler than a checklist? So this is something that we continue to work on. So please have a look at some of the questions that we've tried to put here across each pillar. If you have any suggestions, then please do share that with us. But the way to use these questions is that when you try to answer them, the more yeses that you have, the more optimal your program could be or is likely to be. So yeah, that's a little set of questions. What I'd like to do now is invite my colleagues Atit and Pavi back on video for the Q&A section. But before I hand it over to Pavi for the Q&A, I'd like to bring you both in. I'd like to ask you that from this set of questions, if you each had to pick one question from the checklist that you think a significant portion of the ecosystem would have to say no to, would not be able to say yes to, what would that question be and why? So yeah, Atit, do you want to go first?
I'm going first. Okay, let's see. I think I would choose the first one in process. Are your innovation programs mapped across the idea journey?
Okay. Okay.
And yeah, I think a lot of it comes from my own experience before when I was to work in a manufacturing firm and then in a startup. I think even in a startup, we had these opportunities to sort of build new solutions or go after new markets. We used to struggle. It was not the same thing for us as the founders doing it. A lot of us learn on the job and then try to figure out how to sort of make it possible. So yeah, that's the one for me.
Got it. Thanks. Pavi, what about you?
Yeah, so I was, Atit, I think you stole my question. So I'm not very happy with that, but that's okay. I have a slightly different point of view though. I think the same question for me as well, but what I feel is that a lot of GCoEs are very focused on the ideation stage. So they don't have clear structures across the idea journey. So there is not enough structures in the problem solution fit or the product market fit phases. And the lack of structures and programs in the later phases sort of hinders closing the loop with the idea that come out of the ideation phases. So I feel that is one thing that I've noticed in a lot of GCoEs.
Got it. Super. So thank you. Over to you, Pavi.
Thanks a lot, Divya, for the question. Speaking of questions, now we're in the Q&A session. And we have a couple of great questions from the audience. So I think we'll start with Seema's question. Seema, would you like to unmute yourself and maybe share the question with Divya and Atit to see what they have to say?
Sure, happy to do that, and I think this kind of came up a little early on in the journey of the discussion. Very useful discussion, by the way. Thanks for that. I think while I often use the example of fitness when it comes to innovation. I think it's as essential as fitness, and it's as confusing, and everyone wants to do it, and each of us is thinking of a number of different things. And it's that dilemma that we're all in. And often what happens is, and I've kind of been on different sides of the table, so I mean, I know that every step is important, yet it can get very frustrating and draining sometimes when we start bottoms up, where we're saying activity to impact, which is how I'm not surprised with what you're observing, but that's also not necessarily the best way to do it. In your experience, have you found any models or frameworks where, getting alignment on innovation, ambition, and maturity, which is more aligned with an organization's ambition and maturity, is much easier than to take it. It's the same thing, right? It's like an OKR. You start with an objective and kind of go down there, then start with activity and, look for an ale. What's your recommendation there?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Seema, for that. And I love the fitness example that you gave. I think it's on point completely. I think to your piece, exactly the piece mentioned the OKR approach, right? So in that sense, yes, the GCoE innovation mandate or the approach cannot be different from the global, from the headquarters, which is there. So when it comes to the strategic intent of the program, in terms of the sponsorship, the resources, the charters, it has to flow, from the corporate strategy, which is there. Now, that being said, when it comes to saying, okay, how do you enable this? How do you make it possible? That's where, what you have is most likely a very different starting point in the GCoE versus the headquarters. Not just for any other reason, but just the environment is different, right? Odds are you're away from the customer, odds are, the initial work which came down to the GCoEs of a certain nature, the leaderships are not always sitting here. So when you bring in those environmental factors, what changes is the processes have to sort of adapt to this construct, and then they have to sort of be solved for that environment. So that is the part where you start localizing a lot of the elements in terms of the kind of programs you would run, right? So I would maybe, if I had to build on the fitness example, I would say this is a scenario where you don't have the world-class gym, but you still want to solve for fitness. So how do you go about doing it, right? And you sort of use the levers available to you and sort of figure out how to create those exercises around that. So I would maybe bring in that kind of a contextualization, but all of this still gets derived from a direction perspective up top, because finally what we are solving for is we are solving for flow of information, we are solving for flow of decision, we are solving for flow of resources, and in that sense that alignment is critical. So the way you read this maturity part is that strategic intent, the way we mark it out, is in conjunction with the headquarters and not in isolation.
Sure, Atit, thanks. I mean, I think change management is a key part all along the way, and this perhaps is one of those where you can start top down, bottom. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's about building the rhythm. I think it's all about building the rhythm.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you, Seema. Now, one question that we often get is that, so we know we've discussed about how there is an incubation period for innovation. We've discussed that there's an innovation portfolio. A question that we often get asked, and some people on the chat are asking this as well, is that when can you expect returns from innovation? And how do you know you're on the right track?
Do you want to take that first? I can maybe add to it.
Yeah, so no, definitely. I think you have to look at metrics slightly the beginning of the journey. So you have to look at if your ideas are one getting approved or not, right? Because that's the first stage gate. So you have to divide your entire journey into stage gates, so approved or not. Then you start to see that, okay, if we're not able to get our ideas approved, then why are they not getting approved? Is it because of, the kind of impact that they are saying that they need to have, but, they're not able to make a case for that? Or is it something else? And that's where you start to kind of figure out why. Sometimes it's as simple as the idea not being articulated well enough, because we work with a lot of engineers. Pitching is a different skill set. That's really where it gets lost. So I think the first thing you want to look at is approval rate, and then start to improve that. The next thing that you look at is impact. But in terms of impact, you can start to like kind of have a hypothesis and see, this is what I thought would happen at the beginning of the journey, and I estimated, like my calculation was estimated that in X amount of time, I'm able to have this kind of an impact. So across some case studies, we saw something very interesting. Every time you deploy something and you do a POC, you have a realized impact, and then you have still potential impact, because maybe you have hit so many people in the value chain, but not so many. So you still, maybe in the next 1 year or something, you're kind of proving that I'm going to be on that track. So yeah, you have to look at output, which is implementation, and then after that you're going to look at business impact, and then you can keep improving it. Do not start the other way, because it can be confusing.
Yeah, I would maybe add two things to that. One of the lesser known facts about the startup ecosystem, for example, is that it takes on an average about 4 to 5 years for a company to hit a unicorn stages, right? And I'm just talking about valuation. There are a lot of questions in terms of valuation, but even in that best case scenario, it takes about 4 to 5 years for a really big, a breakthrough innovation or a new concept to really, take phase. The second lesson known fact about the ecosystem is that when any of these startups are getting funded, they are getting funded on directional cues, not necessarily on the business plan. So when you are a person starting on that journey, yes, you can answer a lot of questions through research, through validation and everything, but it will still not answer all the questions. And one of the challenges that we see with corporates is that because there is that need to give guaranteed outcomes, and which is interesting because there is nothing like guaranteed outcomes. I'm saying this to peers who invest in stocks, right? Which is there. So what you're really solving for is odds, probability, and you're solving for directional part, which is there. And what you want to do is that as you go along that journey, you want to keep building evidence so that you keep investing more. You want to say, okay, I'll keep backing this up. So yes, speed, time is something very, very contextual. Know that it won't be easy. Bigger the scale that you're going after, odds it'll take a longer period to go after. The decision-making framework that you have is purely based on probability and odds, which is there. And then basis that you look at your risk and you say, okay, you know what, this is a reasonable risk for me to go forward to the next step in terms of deployment. A typical deployment period, if you are doing, say, a corporate startup collaboration, another example, from the first conversation to deployment typically takes 9 months. Just to give a time frame, right? And these are not all breakthrough partnerships; these are transformative partnerships. In case of incremental, I think we have seen something like what 3 to 4 months on an average for something to get deployed into, from the time the idea really jumps up. So yeah, I mean it won't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It'll take time, but you can solve for it in context of probability.
Yeah, I'd like to add two more points to this. So basically, if we're talking about it from a GCoE's journey, we have seen, less than 5-year-old GCoEs actually be able to reach that process stage. So that means that, the way they went about it was right, and they're able to see impact sooner. And we do see GCoEs that have been around for a while still be at the earlier stages for of maturity. And if we look at it from a project point of view, not like an organization point of view, the same impact question, we have seen GCoEs have clear targets where they say that now we are able to reduce the time to market to 2 years. So you first see how much time that you're taking to go, and then you'll be like, okay, I'll put in these customer mechanisms, I'll make my entire process faster, and then I will kind of bring down this time that it takes me to hit the market.
Got it. Thank you so much, Atit and Divya. My chat window is blowing up, but I'm going to try my best to get as many questions asked as possible. So the other question that I have is, Atit, you were also talking about incremental innovation, right? Can you maybe touch upon what we mean by incremental, transformative, and breakthrough innovation, and whether breakthrough innovation is really necessary for us to reach innovation as a culture phase of maturity?
Got it. I think breakthrough innovation, is it necessary for you to reach culture of innovation? Maybe not, but odds are if you have culture of innovation, you will get into breakthrough, right? In that sense. So the core point of culture of innovation is that there is enough reference evidence in the organization that the employee believes that innovation or going after a new idea or taking up a new project or doing something out of the ordinary is possible, appreciated in the organization, and they want to participate. All right. That feeling of it, right? Of today, when you go to Google or you go to Apple, a new college graduate would always say that they're extremely innovative, right? That perception, that feeling, that is where the whole culture of innovation really anchors on, because it allows you to participate and do things. So to that question specifically, do you need breakthrough innovation to be in culture of innovation? Maybe not. But it will start to happen. So in that maturity curve, you will be maybe at the lower end of the segment. Over a period of time, you can start building towards it. In terms of incremental, transformative, and breakthrough, I think it's a good question. It's also a question which does not have a very clear answer, because every company and every consultant also has their own definition of what incremental is, transformative is, what breakthrough is. We tend to break it on the scale in terms of saying that, okay, if this is going to be something which is in addition to a product that I'm already doing, it's going to be part of the existing product. It's going to something not fundamentally change the look and feel of the product, the solution itself. We would typically bucket that into incremental, which is there. Think of it something which is not evident. I would maybe put that into incremental for a third party, right? For somebody not privy to the subject. Transformative is something I would say it's visible. There is a fundamental shift in terms of what you're doing. A classic case of a lot of licensing companies going into SaaS model. Very evident stuff. Business model changed, right? You could see it, you could feel it. And then breakthrough is that big bang thing which makes the newspapers, right? More often than not, which is there. So I would maybe classify them in terms of the visibility of it, the scale of it, on those two broad parameters. Yeah, that would be my answer. Divya, anything I'm missing there?
Yeah, and also something that's a capability that's completely new that you've created is breakthrough innovation. It's also more high risk, so more uncertainty. Yeah, and also every organization we see is defined it very differently. For example, it helps to internalize this and really put a framework to it for your organization, because then you define breakthrough as XX return at least, and nothing below that is interesting for my organization. And yeah.
No, there's a reason for it. As a last point is that let's say Zinnov has is also an organization. It has a certain revenue which is significantly different than all of our customers. But we also want to innovate in that particular sense, and we want to also figure out new offerings. But our parameters are going to be fundamentally different. We may not go for $1 billion opportunity every single time. We might talk in few millions, but for a Fortune 5 company, it may not even make a sense. So that's where a lot of this distinction starts to happen.
Got it. Maybe both of you can touch a little bit more upon how we evaluated it while analyzing these companies, right? What did we consider incremental, breakthrough, transformative? And did we look at disruption as a key parameter?
Should To answer that, I mean, disruption as such is not something that one can measure, but somewhere where the organization, actually one very interesting piece I want to bring in. So I think we saw a lot of organizations talk about breakthrough innovation, but what they're actually speaking about is a particular emerging technology, okay, that they're working on, and that becomes breakthrough. But those are things that we did not consider as breakthrough innovation. And why is because there's no clear link, or you've not been able to articulate a really clear link to why it's a purely like new capability for your business, and it's an interesting opportunity that you're going after. So only if there's a case for that, and it's a business case, not a technology case, is where we consider it a breakthrough innovation.
Got it.
And I will keep talking about this. You should ask the next question, but I think what I would maybe call out here is that there is a difference or distinction from where we see it between invention and innovation.
Yeah.
Right. Invention is fundamentally something new that you're building out. It could be, say, for example, converted into a patent or a trade secret, but it may not be monetized or may not be adopted by customers. Innovation is about using building new capabilities, using your existing capabilities, repurposing them into something customers end up adopting, which is there. And the reason we're keeping this distinction is because it comes from the whole Apple story, right? If you look at iPod, a lot of technology in iPod was not built by Apple. It was present out there before, but what they were able to do was they were able to string it together, of course, add their flavor on top of it, and then make it into a great business and a product that all of us love, right? We remember it for. And Steve Jobs is known as an innovator, not as an inventor. So that distinction is very, very important, right? What is invention and what is innovation? I think we go on the second part, on the innovation side.
Got it. Thanks, Atit. Thanks, Divya. Now we have a question from Suman about how innovation can result in disruption to the product roadmap, and HQ naturally wishes to manage such strong pivots or changes as they see it as a risk. Suman, would you like to maybe unmute yourself and ask Divya and Atit the question that you have?
So essentially, yeah, this is something that we have actually seen in our company, that the innovations that we kind of like try to come up with, they invariably create a lot of disruption on the product roadmap, right? So in terms of like impacting the existing execution, right, and also as well as like kind of taking in a separate direction as such. So when that happens, I mean, there is a little bit of like a nervousness or an anxiety from the HQ, in which like they see that, okay, this is something a little bit of a risk that needs to be managed, and they would like to kind of like, rather than it being driven from the GCoE, they would want it to be a something that is very heavily collaborated with the with the teams in the headquarters, or not like that, right? So at that point of time, we lose that edge, the edge that like GCoE wants to have and wants to drive, right? It becomes a little bit of diluted. So how do we kind of like get past that stage and like truly get into the culture stage wherein we are independently owning the innovation?
I think, Suman, it's a very valid and very important question. I think what we have seen is that the success stories that we have seen in the ecosystem have broadly anchored on two things. One is built with the leaders, and second is built in terms of the risk appetite of the company itself, as terms to how does the HQ generally take a lot of these decisions of new products, or how do they look at risk in general, right? Now, typically, what happens is that a lot of companies which you see currently, GCoEs in the innovation as a culture, one advantage they have is they've got a solid headquarters backing, the way they look at risk, and consequently the way they're investing in capabilities and processes with the GCoE is in sync. So there's a lot of confidence in the process, and they'll allow the process to solve for the risk part. When that is not existent, it comes down to the leader or the team which is pitching in. The approach that we have seen there is where there is a specific interventions or advisory support that the teams end up taking. And when I say advisory, it could be a sponsor who's not part of the discussion or the sign off, but is a great champion of the product. It could be an internal leader, it could be a specific individual outside who's helping them. But what they typically try to do is they try to build a lot more evidence in terms of saying that yes, we will be the ones who will keep doing it. So The typical coaching which ends up going in there for the team is to say that, okay, how do we build up more evidence? How do we end up building some other capabilities to get the confidence? So evidence is data, think of it that way. The confidence part is the softer skills where they start pushing in terms of articulation of the solution, in terms of building the case from day one, in terms of why India would still have an edge, even if it's a global product being built from India. Unfortunately, right now, it's always part of these two things. Either it's a process where the HQ and the company is very nicely aligned, they believe in the process, or the leaders sort of hack the system in terms of getting certain advisory support, but with the intent of very clear of building the confidence and showcasing evidence of execution. We have seen some great examples of products being built out of India where they were only focused on India market. I'm not too sure if you have that edge or not, but what the team did is they said we'll only build for the India market. We'll build it under a different brand which is there, and there was existing product available globally. But this one picked up very, very fast, and eventually the global got subsumed into the India product, and this became like one team driving it. So they took the brand from global, they took the India team to drive it, which is there. But the advantage they had was they were able to solve for this person that I'm only going after this particular territory, or I'm only going after this set of customers. I'm going after a slightly different brand name, which is there. But if that is not the case, because it's going to impact potentially the existing revenue, they'll be extremely averse to it, and it will boil down to process and the leader.
Yeah. This one point I want to add to that. So, Suman, I think something that we've also seen, it's about how we use our channels and the forum, right, to bring these ideas forward. So we've seen a lot of organizations really look at it as, the famous Shark Tank events as such, where you get like this one chance and you present your idea and it's a go, no go decision. Unfortunately, a lot of good things can actually be lost there. Yeah, and be it for someone who's putting that idea across and trying to understand the risk appetite even of the person on the other side. So are they looking for more numbers? Are they looking for more evidence? Are they looking for building more belief in my team's capability of taking it forward? Just that kind of a forum we've not seen work, where we're seeing some really disruptive things being done. It's also a lot of like relationship building, having a clear understanding of how the person on the other side thinks, building that trust in yourself and your team over a period of time, and putting that say idea as to, hey, this is an opportunity. You think that, okay, this opportunity is a no at this point, okay, maybe this person is looking for a little more proof there, so let me go back with why we can do it. And then over time you kind of get that go ahead for, yeah, go do this slightly high risk project. I do have confidence in you. So I think forum is very important.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah, great insights.
Thank you, Suman.
Thank you.
So I think we have time for one last question. So we have a lot of R&D firms in the audience, right? So one question that's commonly asked is how to make the best use of academic partnership, and what is considered a good partnership with academia. Divya, do you want to take it up?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we've looked at a few kind of partnerships that are happening. There's quite a lot of stuff happening, honestly, on the employer branding side. There is a bunch of things that happen in terms of open research that GCoEs are taking up, and then there are specific problem statements where they want to leverage a particular say it's an algorithm and they want to say make that better. They collaborate with the entities to do that. So I think with academics, it should be both. It should be definitely something that gives you more is giving an outcome or is helping you solve a particular current business state problem, but it doesn't always have to be, because sometimes it can be research focused, because that's the best way a lot of times to leverage academic institutions. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
those two pieces.
I think how I would build on that is a great partner when you're thinking about academia is the HR or the talent team to work alongside with, because you can potentially solve for multiple things, together. How at least I would look at it is from two perspectives. One is a partnership which allows me to explore an area or to move from point A to point B, kind of a bit. So this could be your applied research, core research, for example. You work with few universities on certain specific topics which require a different kind of environment, a different kind of mindset, a different kind of capabilities to explore it. But you're doing this from a long-term horizon perspective, right? You're doing a near to mid-term horizon. You, let's say, for example, partner with a technology business incubator, which is say focusing on phygital security. There's something coming up in IIT Kanpur. Now, it's a space which will take some time to evolve in India, but in the Indian environment, if you're able to work with someone who's solving for scale in India in phygital security, then it can be sort of taken globally. So you can start getting involved on that particular part, and you have the line of sight. But I would classify this into more like applied research, because these folks are trying to build a business out of it rather quickly instead of just publishing papers. The other way to do it is to think of what capabilities you require and how can a academia give it, right? So say, for example, you want to solve for generating awareness amongst the employees, amongst the larger team as to what's happening in the ecosystem. You can always come to us, but shameless plug there. But the other way is to say that, okay, can you partner with, say, I am Ahmedabad or I am Bangalore, and say that, hey, look, we would want you or your PhD students to sort of work on, say, impact of 5G in banking or something like that, right? Which is there. There are smart people out there, but they can bring in that perspective and add into your capabilities overall, right? If you're working with talent, then focus on idea generation, but then that's about it. You're looking for perspectives more than anything else in terms of expanding your knowledge, not necessarily the solution, but approach the solution possibly. But there's a classic way you work with the talent team because they're going to be hiring freshers. Can you make it more interesting for people, which is there? So I would think of it from put a horizon view to it, put a capability view to it, and then say, okay, this is something core thing, I'll keep investing. This is something which is augmenting my other innovation programs, for example.
Love that. Thank you, Atit. Thank you, Divya.